Today we're going to be starting Chapter 3, and one of the most important things that we need to notice about Chapter 3 is the first lesson in Chapter 3 is the vocabulary. With this lesson we're going to be working with a lot of different properties, and if you look across the top page of your book, you're going to see commutative property of multiplication, associative property of multiplication, identity property of multiplication, and zero property of multiplication. And if you recall back to whenever we were doing our estimating and our rounding of numbers, we talked about commutative property with addition and we talked about associative property, but now we're going to
talk about them with multiplication. And the easiest way to do this is just to show you some examples of what these words mean. So we'll start with commutative. And all that commutative property is saying is if I have 2 times 5, that means the same thing as 5 times 2. So I can change the order in which I list these numbers, but it does not change my answer. Either way, 2 times 5 is 10,
or 5 times 2 is 10. So commutative property just means that I can change the order in which they're listed as long as I have that multiplication sign and it does not change my answer. So another example could be 7 times 8 is equal to 8 times 7.
Notice all I did is change the location of the numbers. That is commutative property of multiplication. Then we have associative.
And all associative is saying if I have something where I'm multiplying multiple numbers, an example here, and this is the one that's across the top of your book. If I have 2 times 5 times 3, and I put parentheses around 2 times 5, associative property says I can change the location of those parentheses and put it around 5 times 3, and I'm still going to get the same answer. Okay? So no matter if I have my parentheses around 2 times 5, and then multiply that times 3, I'm going to get the same answer as if I had 5 times 3 in parentheses and multiplied it by 2. So all I'm doing is changing the location of my parentheses. Okay? So, and just to prove that, 2 times 5 would be 10. 10 times 3 is 30. Over here, 5 times 3 is 15. 15 times 2 is equal to 30 as well. Okay? So, another example would be
6 times 3 times 7 is equal to 6 times 3 times 7. Notice my numbers are still in the same location.
I'm just going to change where I'm putting my parentheses. In the first one, I'm putting in around 6 times 3. In the second one, I'm putting in around 3 times 7.
So associative property says I can change the location of my parentheses and it does not change the product. Okay?
The answer to multiplication, it does not change the product. Then we have identity property. Identity property of multiplication and zero property of multiplication are probably going to be the two easiest for you to remember. Identity property says anything times 1 is itself. For example, 5 times 1 equals 5. Identity property says anything times 1 is itself. So if I have 7 times 1, my answer is 7. If I have 5,263 times 1, the answer is 5,263. Identity property says anything times 1 is itself. Okay?
And then we have zero property of multiplication.
And with zero property of multiplication, it's self-explanatory as well. Anything times 0 is always 0. For example, 5 times 0 equals 0. Okay? 12 times 0 equals 0. 1,462 times 0 equals 0. So 0 property of multiplication says anything times 0, my answer is always 0. Identity property of multiplication says anything times 1 is always that number. Associative property says I can change the location of my parentheses, but the order of my numbers does not change. Okay, if you notice, I still have 2 times 5 times 3, but the location of my parentheses has changed. Here it's around the 2 times the 5, here it's around the 5 times the 3. So I can change the location of my parentheses, and my product, the answer to multiplication, does not change. Up here I have commutative property. That says I can change the location of my numbers as long as I keep that symbol the same in the middle. So here I can have 2 times 5, and that answer is going to be equivalent or equal to 5 times 2. Okay, so very quickly, let's do a few examples, and you can pause this if you need to. I'm going to walk through the examples. After I write the example, you can pause it if you need to think about it for a moment. And then we'll go right into the properties. But the biggest thing that you need to know about this lesson is you need to understand those 4 vocabulary words. Okay? So, if I give you the example of 65 times 1, you need to be able to tell me that is the what property? Okay? That is the identity property. If I would give you this problem, 6 times 20 times 5, here I'm putting the parentheses around 6 times 20, is equal to 6 times 20 times 5. Here I'm going to put my parentheses here. Tell me that property. You should have answered associative. Associative property says I can change the location of my parentheses, but not the order in which the numbers are listed. My product will stay the same. Product is the answer to multiplication. Okay? Here's another example. If you notice, all I did is change the location of the numbers, but I kept the same numbers. That property is commutative. And again, if you need just a minute to think about these before I write the answer over here, go ahead and pause that video so it gives you a chance to think about it. Okay? And if I have we automatically know, since there is a 0 here, it is the 0 property of multiplication. Okay, so throughout today's lesson, you're going to be using these vocabulary words: identity property of multiplication, associative property of multiplication, commutative property of multiplication, and 0 property of multiplication. You have to know identity means 1. Anything times 1 is that number. With associative, I can change the location of my parentheses, but my order of numbers stays the same. Commutative means I can change the order in which I'm multiplying, and I'll still get the same product. And 0 property says anything I multiply times 0 is going to give me 0. Okay, let's do a couple more examples. This time, I'm going to leave a part out, and you're going to try to fill in the parentheses. So if I would give you 5 times 20 times 9, and I tell you that's equal to 5 times 20 times blank. Here, I'm putting the parentheses around 5 times 20. Here, I'm going to put it times 20, or around 20 and the missing number, okay? If I think back, associative property tells me I can change the location of these parentheses, but it does not change the order of the numbers. So all I have to do is look to see, here I have my 5, here I have my 20, so my missing number has to be 9. So 9 would be the number that goes in the blank. So you have to be able to recognize that this is associative property, and then you have to remember that you use all the same numbers in associative property, and the number missing would be 9. Okay, what if I have 635 times 47 times some number, and it's equal to 0? If I think about my multiplication properties, anything that is equal to 0, the 0 property of multiplication should come to mind. So in order for it to be equal to 0, I have to be multiplying by a 0 right here. So 0 would be the answer that goes in the blank, because anything times 0 is always 0. Okay? If you want extra practice with that, there are numbers 20 through 25 in the book. Your homework is going to be workbook page 14.